And good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another live Art Business Academy Q&A session. I'm Jason Horsch, owner of Xanadu Gallery, and your host for these sessions. It's great to be here with you all again in another live session on Friday. It's been a busy week here in Scottsdale, and the time just seems to fly by, but it's great to get back in the session. And today's session is one of our artist features. We're going to be focusing on getting to know one of your fellow Art Business Academy members. This is one of three different types of broadcasts we do in this question and answer series. And so for those of you who are new, and we do have some new members in January or from January. And so I just want to mention that these sessions, especially where we're meeting another member and we're looking at some of the things that they've worked on in the Academy, just realize that I'm typically selecting artists who are much further along than those of you in the early stages are. And so some of the things we're going to talk about are still on the horizon for you, things to be working on. We're going to be talking about pricing and portfolio and all those kind of things. Don't panic as you work your way through the lessons. You're going to be working on all of these things as well. And you certainly might not be ready for me to pull you into one of these interviews today, but in not the not too distant future, you'll have worked through all these things with me, and we'll have you ready to do this too. But I just feel it's really helpful and useful to you to get to know other members, to see different kinds of artwork that these artists are promoting, and their portfolios and biographies, and to get a diversity of views on the different approaches to the art business. And so with that, our artist today is Emily Talley. And Emily primarily is working in pastels. And so we're going to be exploring that just a little bit and talking about her work and getting to know a little bit of her background. So with that, I'd like to welcome you. Good morning, Emily. It's good to be here with you. And I appreciate you being willing to sit in the spotlight for this session.
Hi, Jason. I appreciate you inviting me to do this.
Yeah, it's exciting. So Emily, let's begin. Let's start with a little bit with you sharing just a little bit of your background, how you came to art. Maybe even before we get to that, though, tell us where you live and where you're coming from and where you work.
I live in Minnesota. It's extremely cold right now. We're having a pretty brutal winter this year, so every day it's sub-zero.
Yeah.
So I've been here about almost 40 years now. I grew up in Southern California, so I moved here to go to art school.
And that's quite a move, quite a change of pace to go from California to
Yeah.
Minnesota. And
Yeah.
was your interest in art, did it as with many artists, did it come at a very early age, or what was your introduction to art? And how did you come to know that you wanted to pursue that seriously?
I've been doing art since I was a kid. And it was never a decision. It was just that's who I was, and that's I never sat down and made a decision. Should I do this or should I do my art? I just the art it's always a part of my life. So and it a lot of times in my life, especially like as a teenager and young adult, it really served as a way for me to both express and contain really powerful emotions and things I was going through. So for me, my artwork, it tends to always be very personal, and a lot of and very authentic about my responses to what's going on in life. And so
And you had the opportunity, even before you went to art school, to begin some formal and semi-formal training. Talk about that a little bit.
I started formal training when I was about 16 years old. I'm 60 now. So, and I really wanted to learn figurative sculpture. I really, really wanted to learn how to do that. Um, and so I searched for a sculptor, and I was in San Diego at the time, and I found Frank Morgan. He had a studio in Balboa Park, um, and I started taking classes from him, and I just loved it. And he took me under his wing, and he'd let me come in, anytime during the week, and so I had studio space there to work in, and I just really took off. He would call me Hot Shot and House of Fire. So, uh, yeah.
Yeah, and
So
and I
yeah.
think and did your first of all, I think that's a little bit unusual, at least from the sense of knowing the teenagers who live in my own household. I don't know of any of them that would be motivated to go out on their own and search
Yeah.
out opportunities like that. Did your parents encourage you to pursue this? Was it self motivated or
Mm,
what? What? How did that come about?
no, it just came from inside of me. um, no, I didn't get that much encouragement. It was a pretty difficult childhood, actually. So, no, it really came from deep inside. And also people that I met along the way, you know. Um, so yeah, I
And then you went to art school and talk a little bit about that experience and then kind of what unfolded after you left art school.
okay. Um, so uh, so I moved to Minnesota to go to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, um, and I studied painting, mostly painting and drawing. And um, early on, early on with art, I really loved doing figurative work. So I practiced and practiced for many years, decades, drawing the figure, and just absolutely loved doing that. Um,
And let me pause you for just a second because you mentioned you
mhm,
started out with a sculptor, and so what kind of moved you in the direction, pushed you towards painting and drawing away from sculpture, I guess.
oh, um, well, I had always been doing the drawing also and the painting. Um, so I don't know that anything really pushed me away from it, although I did move. So I moved out of state, and that kind of, cut those lessons with sculpture. Um, and also the sculpture that I was learning, it was cold cast bronze. So it was it was a very lengthy and tedious process. So each piece would take about a year and a half from start to finish. um, and and I think I got a little, I wanted things to go a little bit quicker.
Indeed.
um, but also, I don't know, it just felt like I had done. uh, I felt just satisfied, and I kept going. So I went to Minneapolis College of Art and Design for a year and a half. There were some policies there at the time that I really disagreed with. They didn't allow women instructors to teach past the first year, and I had a harder and harder time accepting that.
Hmm.
I also had interest in the sciences and math, so I transferred to a university and continued with my art, but also then took mathematics and physics and chemistry and minored in math. So yeah.
Yeah, so really, I think for many artists that would seem like you're using two distinctly different sides of the creative mind and the analytical and mathematical mind, and then
Yeah.
you went out from there, and you didn't immediately pursue a career in art.
Oh no, no. um, no, I kept going to college. I loved being in school and I loved learning and I really liked the structure of it. So I stayed in college for most of my adult life. um, and eventually I went into several different areas. Eventually I went into computer science. And then I went on to graduate school and got a master's degree in software engineering. And that's where my day job career has been for like over 20 years now. So
And then what brought you back towards art and towards pursuing it more consistently and more full time?
well, let's see, about uh, I I had been in a I had been in a long-term relationship, and it wasn't really was becoming unhealthy for me. Um, and So I managed to leave that about 4 years ago now or so. And I realized that I during the course of that relationship I had become completely disconnected with my art. And then I also realized I had become disconnected with my own self. Um, and so I did a lot of work around that and then I just felt drawn to start doing my artwork again. And I was very tentative at first because there had been such a separation for almost 15 years. Um, and then it just really started coming together and it's just been starting to take off. So um, yeah, it's
Yeah, excellent. And so now we're going to hop over and take a look at Emily's art. I think you're going to see as we do that, you're going to see a lot of threads of what Emily's been talking about, kind of coming together in the work itself. And as usual in these sessions, as we start looking at the artwork. We're going to be looking at several different things. We'll look at, we just want to get a sense of the work itself. We're also going to be looking for the consistency of the work and kind of get a sense of direction in terms of Emily's work. And as we do that, as I always like to bring up, we're looking for several different criteria when it comes to consistency. We're going to examine the work in this way. And that is that we're looking for the consistency of subject matter, thematic elements, style, palette, medium, and presentation. And so with that, we're just going to jump right into looking at the work. And as usual as well, I'm going to try and resist my urges to comment or talk about it until after we've looked at the work. I'm going to invite several of you from the panel to comment on the consistency of what you're seeing in the work. But as we're looking at it, Emily, talk a little bit about your medium and the scale of the work and kind of how and why you've come to work in the way that you have.
okay. Um, let's see. The scale of my work, at least so far, as I've reconnected with it over these past few years, is smaller. So for the first year, actually everything was about 8 inches by 8 inches.
So very small, yes.
Yeah, and I very gradually started pushing that. So after about a year, then I tried 12 by 12, and I stayed at that for about a year. um, so this piece is 12 by 12, and it's called The Cost of War. And this one's also 12 by 12. Um, and then just recently, again, I sort of pushed a little bit more, and then I was doing 14 by 14. um, and then recently I pulled out, I work on watercolor paper. So
Mm-hmm.
I pulled out a pad, and it just happened to be 14 by 20 inches. And I was playing. A lot of my approach is playful. And I'm just exploring, and then I see where it leads me and what evolves. It's like having a conversation, um, a deep conversation. Um, so as I was just playing and experimenting with different techniques, then those turned into pieces, into paintings, and then I just kept working in that size. So yeah, I have this one is 8 by 8 tulips. Um, I yeah,
And
um, I like working
how
with
did you
smaller.
come to pastels?
Um, let's see. Let's see. I don't know why I decided on. I don't know why I chose pastels. I I wanted to start using color. So in the past, I mostly worked in black and white and pencil with drawings. Um, and I just honestly, I don't know why I decided on pastel. But as I've explored it, what I've what I've been doing is I'm combining all different types of pastels,
Hmm.
so all within one piece, and I really enjoy that because intuitively they shouldn't work together. I use the oil-based and the water-based and the dry pastel, and I use them in all sorts of different ways with each other. Um, and it's just fascinating to me because I can just keep exploring and researching and playing. And just this past week, I tried another technique with them that I'd never tried, and I was stunned. I didn't think that you could do that
Mhm.
with oil pastels. So it's been really interesting. So
Excellent.
um,
Well, okay, so we've been able to look through all the pieces that I have here. So let me pull a couple of you in to just comment. Have Mason, and I'm going to throw you back on mute. Have distinctive subjects here, kind of two distinctive subject categories where we have the more abstract and certainly, kind of more they're not quite non-objective, because I think even the very abstract pieces still, they still have objective elements. But you could certainly, if you were thinking about, okay, how am I going to organize this work? You'd probably think about going in some sort of narrative from either more abstract to less abstract, and then to include some of the figurative work, or you might go in the opposite direction. But there's definitely two kind of distinctive groupings of work that you see here, between the figurative work and maybe the non-figurative work is a better way to think about it. Any other comments on that? These images that I'm showing you are, you'll remember in assignment 2, I have you send in your 10 most recent pieces. And then Emily also sent me just some other additional recent pieces because it's been a little while since I got assignment 2 and 3 from her. And so we're not looking at a grouping of work that is put together in a way that's intended to be presented to galleries or to the public. We're just literally looking almost as if we walked into Emily's studio and just started looking around at the different pieces in a completely unorganized way. So it'll be interesting for us to hop over to the portfolio in just a few minutes and see that. I do want to comment though, especially there are, as we think about that element, okay, what's shared and what's not, there are a few pieces that I think are more difficult to share. This piece is probably because it definitely has a social commentary, and because it's a difficult social commentary where obviously just looking at it, we know that there's a tremendous amount of emotion being expressed here, a very difficult situation. As a gallery owner and thinking about kind of marketing, selling, this is a piece that would be very difficult for someone to encounter out of context. Just maybe in a gallery, just on display, or for a gallery owner in a portfolio. This is certainly a little bit more of a challenge. Let's put it this way: more of a challenging piece to work with, and probably if certainly this would not be a focal point in a portfolio initially as I'm trying to push my artwork out to the world, because I feel like I would need to work a viewer's way up to something like this. And there are a couple other pieces too that just have not necessarily quite as strong as that piece and impactful, but some other pieces that you just know that they're going to have, they're going to require more understanding and more time to contemplate, and are probably a little bit less. And I'm choosing my words very carefully here, because as we all know, some of the most important work from art history are exactly these kinds of works that do pose a challenge to the viewer, and that are more difficult from a commercial standpoint. Just thinking purely in terms of, okay, what's the broader general public going to be interested in? They're going to be a little bit more of a challenge for a gallery to deal with in that way. And so in thinking about that, again, as we get to the portfolio, we're going to want to think about how we can, either work our way up to those, create a narrative that slowly but surely introduces someone to that, or those might be pieces that would be introduced later, in another portfolio, or they might be pieces, certainly museums and public exhibitions and juried shows. Some of those have more of a social conscious focus. And so those pieces might be better understood in the context of a show that is focused on that kind of material, where you're not seeing it out of context, but you're seeing it among a grouping, and perhaps even have the opportunity to explain, and bring the viewer along with you. And so again, and I do want to move on to talk about pricing and then look at the biography and resume as well. But I did want to just comment that as I reviewed these pieces when the assignment on consistency was submitted, I found them to be very consistent, generally speaking. And I think that we already touched on a couple of the elements that really bring them together. Obviously, the medium is, a 10 out of 10 in terms of consistency, and the palette and the use of, the motion and the action in the pieces. One really gets the sense that these pieces are being created with a lot of energy, and a lot of emotion. And I think even as you look at the any of the elements that may be different from one piece to the next, that underlying stylistic approach and the action in the pieces, the underlying motion there, these pieces almost pulse with a kind of energy. And that really ties it together. And it doesn't matter if I'm looking at the more abstract pieces, or the figurative pieces, where those figures almost have emerged from that energy and that pulsing. And I think that really helps tie the work together, and makes it work from more abstract to the pieces with figurative. It's almost as if in some of these pieces, you might almost expect that, well, I don't see a figure here, but I wouldn't be surprised if one emerged as I'm looking at it. And, in that sense, if the pieces were displayed together, I think it could work very well. Barry Gordon, I think you might, obviously we've got the figure, but then as we move through, we definitely, Barry's right, there is more towards the abstract and non-figurative, although we see an element in some of these more, I assume, more recent works where we're also seeing elements of landscape and leaves, still handled abstractly. So talk about that, Emily. What was your process for putting together the portfolio?
Well, I was having a hard time figuring out how to, include both the abstract and the figurative. So, so I ended up not including a lot of figurative work. So yeah, that was a challenge. I've actually, Jason, I've actually redone my portfolio entirely.
Oh,
I should have sent that to you. I'm sorry.
well,
Um, I
Emily, maybe I'll have you go ahead and send it to me, and I will add it to the
okay.
resources so that we can see. But I think it's
Okay.
still good for us to look at this one. There are a couple of comments I want to make about this version of the portfolio.
Okay.
And
Um,
so first of all, we're going to see, and I think this portfolio is effective in the sense that if I were presenting this to a gallery, this is for a gallery that is focused on abstract and not non-objective work. This is a body of work that would show very well consistently, and that is approachable from a commercial standpoint. I feel like all of this work could be presented and shown together and be very effective in a gallery display. And so from that perspective, I think this is a very effective grouping of work. And I'll be interested, Emily, in seeing the newer version of the portfolio and to
okay.
comment on that as well. But I think let me hop right back up to the beginning. This piece probably is a piece that makes that transition very nicely. And if I were going to show both the abstract and the figurative pieces, this would probably be a piece that sat right in between those two bodies of work. Because I can go from the abstract and then I hit this, and as I was talking about a few minutes ago, that we kind of get that sense of the figure emerging from the abstraction, and this does a great job of taking us there. And so
Okay.
this is a very strong piece. It makes sense for a cover in this portfolio. But in another, if you were thinking about how to combine those two, I think it'd make a lot of sense to use this as the transition piece. Now, from a logistics standpoint, and this was something that Emily and I emailed back on when she created this portfolio, and it's something I run into with some frequency. The one of the design feedback that I gave was that I felt like in this version of the portfolio, all of the text was a little bit on the large side. And this happens especially if you're creating it in PowerPoint or Google Docs or the Apple presentation software Keynote. Their default is to throw you into large text. They're thinking of it in terms of throwing it up on a projector, and you need to be able to see everything. And so that kind of default. But my concern in a portfolio in design is that I really want to keep the focus on the artwork. And I want the eye to go there first. And when the text is this large, it just pulls my view, my gaze away from the artwork and down to the text. It puts too much importance, I think, on the text. And keeps my focus away from the work itself. And so I pulled a later revision of that, and you can see the difference here as you scale that down. It just makes such a big difference to use that smaller text, because now I'm looking at the work and the information at the bottom I can go to when I need it, but it's not jumping out at me. It's easily accessible without overpowering the artwork. And
No, I didn't have anything in place. um, I had never even it never even occurred to me to do these documents. Um, so yeah, it was a huge eye opener. And uh, I, I don't know. It was um, when I think about it now, I think about actually revising my artist statement quite a bit because I've gotten a lot more insights about my work as over the past year or so. Um, and I think there's some really important insights that would help people connect more deeply with my work, that I haven't said. So I want
Yeah.
to revise it and put those in. So.
Well, and again, especially the artist's statement, and artwork statements are going to kind of come along the way with each piece. But especially the artist statement, that is a living document. You know, as your work is evolving, as your philosophy towards your work is evolving, that should be a document that you all are returning to with some great frequency, to update and revise. Um, you know, you certainly wouldn't want to get to a point where you're reaching out to galleries and presenting them with an up-to-date portfolio, and images of your artwork, but a 10-year-old artist statement, because it's very likely that that person you're talking about in the artist statement of 10 years ago doesn't even exist anymore. You know, that you have evolved in ways in your thinking, that your style has evolved. And so certainly there are going to be some underlying elements of that artist statement that remain valid and intact. You're not going to have to rewrite the artist statement all the time, but you probably are going to be going in there to say some new things, to add, to edit out some things that no longer make sense, and you just want to be living. And that's an opportunity. You wouldn't want to do this too often, but it is an opportunity that as you do revise your artist statement, you can send that out to anyone you have on your mailing list, certainly to your galleries, and just let them know that you have a revised statement, and maybe highlight some of the paragraphs that are a little bit different, and invite them to engage with that philosophy of your work.
Well, Jason, one of
Yeah.
the things I struggled with was, I think, well, is that balance between letting people know some more like personal things so that they can connect more with the art. That balance between that and not talking about
leaving
too many
room.
difficult issues. I think there was one time when you mentioned something about let biographers or let other people talk about the the sort of your personal history or something, or the difficulties, but one of the core things about me in my life that really comes out in my artwork that I haven't mentioned is I was born with a very rare disease, and grew up in the hospital the first 6 years of my life in the hospital. And so there's a lot of medical focus in my life. And as I look at my work, I realize that a lot of it looks like the inside of the body, the veins and
The
all
heart
the
I see in one of
water
the pieces.
and all the movement and the pulsation, the cells and the everything in the body. So I think that's a really important thing about my work, and I haven't expressed it yet or written it down in anything. So
Yeah, and again, that that could be an entire discussion, and I've written blog posts about how to handle that, and it's a balancing act, between sharing enough that people can start to get an insight and an understanding without overwhelming your viewer, and without putting an unintentional focus on the struggle and the challenge. You want to put the focus on overcoming any difficulties and triumph and that kind of thing, and how you've grown and learned from your experiences, and that's a challenge in the best of times, and if anything, you want to err on the side of keeping things positive and upbeat, and just hinting at those challenges and struggles as they may be But I feel like the statement is both your philosophy. It's an opportunity to share and educate about process and approach, which I think your statement does very well. And those are all things that people are going to be very interested in as they're looking at work again, especially if you're working in a medium outside of that, that center line. It's not oil. I've seen pastel and I've heard about pastel before, but and you're mixing different, different kinds of pastels, and that kind of approach can lead to some very interesting conversations and some things to mention in an artist statement as well. I wanted to leave a moment, again, Emily, I want to thank you so much for agreeing to come and sit in the spotlight and talk to us. It's been great in getting to know you and your work a little bit better. And we will have more of these sessions upcoming. Next week's session